Recording in progress. I would like to call the special called meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, September 8th, 2025 to order. The city encourages you to review tonight's agenda carefully. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk or Bernadette prior to the agenda item being called. Why the Milton rules allow a speaker to turn in their comment card until the clerk calls the agenda item. Once the agenda item is called, no more comment cards can be accepted. Bernadette, will you please call roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the September 8th, 2025 special called City Council meeting. I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. As the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, if you would like to make a public comment, then you are required to complete a public comment card before the agenda item is called. If you are representing an organization, a notarized affidavit is required stating you have the authority to speak on behalf of that organization. If you have not submitted your comment card, please bring them to me now. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited. Please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, as I call roll this evening, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Pro Tem Jan Jacobus.
Present.
Councilmember Andrea Verhoff.
Here.
Councilmember Doug Haney.
Here.
Councilmember Carol Cookerly.
Here.
And Councilmember Phil Cranmer.
Here.
For the record, Mayor Jamison and Councilmember Johnson are absent. Mayor Pro Tem, you have a quorum. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is approval of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the meeting agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting agenda as proposed.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Kramer and a second from Councilmember Haney to approve the meeting agenda as presented.
Now we got to vote.
Voting is open.
That passes unanimously. Next is general public comment. Bernadette, are there any general public comments?
We have no public comments, sir.
Since there are no public comments, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Bernadette, will you please sound the items?
Absolutely. Our first consent agenda item is approval of change order number 3 to the Public Works Maintenance and Operations Services Agreement between the City of Milton and Triscapes, Inc. for right-of-way maintenance services, agenda item number 25243. The next item is approval of a services agreement with Testing Services TSI LLC to provide impact testing at Bell Memorial Park and Legacy Park's artificial turf fields, agenda item number 25244. The third item is approval of a recreation provider agreement between the City of Milton and Market Share, Inc., doing business as Babysitter Boot Camp to provide babysitter training classes, which is agenda item number 25245. And our final consent agenda item is approval of subdivision plats and revisions. The first plat is at 735 Champions Close, Lot 4, which is located in Champions Overlook Subdivision, Land Lot 546, District 2, Section 2. This is a minor plat revision to reconfigure the rear parcel boundary to remove the existing encroachment into the adjacent lot in the homestead. It's a total of 1.12 acres. The second plat is 1030 Homestead Drive, Lot 3, which is located in the Homestead Subdivision, Land Lot 546, District 2, Section 2. It is also a minor plat revision to reconfigure the rear parcel boundary to remove the existing encroachment from the adjacent lot in Champions Close. It is a total of 5.02 acres. Our third plat is the City of Milton Hopewell Road at 13482 Hopewell Road, Land Lot 909, 964, and 965, District 2, Section 2. This is a minor plat to combine 4 parcels of land totaling 39.088 acres into one legal lot of record, a total of 39.088 acres. And the final plat this evening is 14770 and 14780 East Bluff Road, North Valley Subdivision, line lot 622 and 623, District 2, Section 2, a minor plat revision to revise the adjoining property line between lots 15 and 16 in order to decrease the size of lot 15 to 4.79 acres and to increase the size of lot 16 to 4.04 acres, which is a total of 8.83 acres. Mayor Pro Tem, that is the consent agenda this evening.
Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
Mayor, make a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
One.
I have a motion from Councilmember Kirkley and a second from Councilmember Veerhoff. Please vote.
Voting is open.
That is unanimous. There are no reports and presentation items. Moving on to first presentation. Bernadette, please sound the items.
All right, give me 1 second. The first presentation item is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt amendments to the fiscal 2025 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, amending the amounts shown in each budget as expenditures, amending the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. We have the first presentation. The first public hearing will be this evening, and unfinished business will be next Monday on September 15th. It's agenda item number 25247. The first presentation item is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt the fiscal 2026 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, appropriating the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. This item will also be under first presentation and first public hearing this evening. We'll have the second public hearing and the final vote on September 15th. This is agenda item number 25248. Mayor Pro Tem?
Is there a motion and a second?
We're making a motion for 247 or 248 or both?
Both of them under first presentation.
I'll make a motion to approve agenda items 25-247 and 25-248.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Kramer and a second from Councilmember Henning to approve the first presentation items as read. Please vote.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to public hearings. Steve, please sound the item.
Sorry, I'm getting mixed up, which is my role. So the first item under public hearing, item A, is consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt amendments to the fiscal 2025 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, amending the amounts shown in each budget as expenditures, amending the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. First presentation was this evening, September 8th, at the special called meeting, and we will have this under unfinished business again at the next meeting at September 15th, regular meeting.
Are there any questions for staff?
Wait,
Oh,
this
I'm
presentation.
sorry.
I
Sorry
was
about
just waiting
that.
for the, I was waiting for the presentation to come
I
up.
used when I did your line.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we are here to discuss the second round of proposed amendments to the fiscal year 2025 budget. The budget for this fiscal year was approved on September 16th, 2024, and initial amendments were approved on June 16th, 2025. The amendment packet before you represents adjustments that will amend line items to carry out projections through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, 2025. This is the sole public hearing that will be held on this agenda item, and consideration of approval will be before you under unfinished business on Monday, September 15th. Before you is the general fund budget summary. You will see the current budget, including amendments approved back in June, under the current budget column, followed by the requested amendments that we will discuss today, and finally the amended budget should the request before you be approved at the next regularly scheduled meeting. And the amended revenues for fiscal year 2025 are shown at $48.3 million after requested amendments that will reduce the budget by $178,122 across several categories, which we'll go over more detail in just a moment. Moving down to the expenditure summary, you will see the amended budget at $50 million, including operating transfers out to other funds. 98% of this $3,077,451 in amendments are associated with transfers out to other funds, $3 million of which will go to the Capital Projects Fund to support the city's pay-as-you-go capital improvement plan, and $19,789 go into the Capital Grant Fund to support the local match required for the hazard mitigation grant that will be accounted for in that fund. We will go over the details of these amendments as well as the transfers later in the presentation. If these amendments are approved as presented, the projected general fund balance will be $12,679,558, which will put the city in line with the fund balance requirement of 25% of the subsequent year's revenues. Any revenues which exceed this forecast and expenditures which come in under this projection will be taken into consideration for one-time projects in the budget amendment process for fiscal year 2026. At this time, we will go over the more significant changes to anticipated revenues for fiscal year 2025. There is a request to increase current year real property taxes by $85,000 according to the most recent digest data available from Fulton County. An increase of $100,000 to title ad valorem tax has also been requested as those revenues received when these are the revenues received when a vehicle is purchased, and they've come in higher than originally forecasted. Conversely, local option sales taxes and building permits are coming in lower than originally anticipated, and we have requested to reduce those line items by $400,000 and $85,000 respectively. This covers the more substantial changes being requested to revenues in this amendment. This year's occupational tax collections are projected to surpass those collections from fiscal year 2024 as seen in this chart. Anytime a government's current year occupational tax collections exceed the previous year's collections, we must include a conversation of how to utilize funds in a public hearing. In the proposed amendments, staff have included these additional revenues in the transfer out to the Capital Projects Fund to support the city's pay-as-you-go funding of one-time projects. This concludes our conversation on highlights of the revenue amendments. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them before I move on to the expenditures. Okay. Here we have the detailed listing of expenditure amendments for the general fund. The initial request you see in Communications Department pertains to the employee benefits category to true up the budget to actual expenses incurred. The Police Department has 3 requests, including the recognition of insurance proceeds in the amount of $7,108, donation funding from the Milton First Responders Fund for equipment purchases at $8,490, and a request of $49,120 from contingency to cover animal control costs, which are exceeding initial projections for the year. In the Public Works Department, there is a request of $30,540 related to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, which will cover 100% of the costs associated with a facility assessment that is currently underway. This grant-funded work will continue into FY26, and any unspent funding in 25 will be relocated next year, along with the portion already anticipated to occur throughout that part of fiscal year 26. The largest portion of this year's amendments is the operating transfer request of $3 million, which will be allocated towards the construction of the new active athletic complex on Deerfield Parkway, based on the most recent concept design costs. Staff is continuing to evaluate design options with the consultant and will present to council for input at a future council meeting. We discussed the local match for the hazard mitigation grant earlier when going over the summary, and you will see that request here, as well as the reduction of $60,587 from contingency to support the requests above that are not associated with their own dedicated revenue sources. And that concludes the expenditure amendments for the general fund. Does anyone have any questions about those before we move on to the special revenue funds? Okay. The first fund we will discuss this evening is the City Events Fund, formerly referred to as the Special Events Fund. For better clarity between special events occurring in the community and those sponsored by the city, we have made this name change. This fund is still budgeted as a special revenue fund and is then merged into the general fund for year-end reporting in the annual comprehensive financial report. Edits to the City Event Fund are associated with the recognition of unspent funds for Earth Day. These funds are being released to fund balance in order to balance the request in fiscal year 26. Any other unspent funding in FY25 will reduce the budgeted transfer from the general fund next year and will be presented during the amendment process for council approval. The amendment at the bottom of the screen is to update the anticipated revenue from the hotel motel taxes from our one hotel on Deerfield and the corresponding transfer out to the City Events Fund. The Georgia Chart of Accounts is requiring jurisdictions that have taken part in the authorized opioid settlements to recognize related revenues and expenses in a separate special revenue fund. Here you will see a request to recognize available fund balance for eligible equipment purchases in the police department for the opioid settlement. And those are all of the items for our special revenues. Do you have any questions before we move on to the capital projects? Okay. Now, in the primary capital projects fund, the revenue section will have recognition of donation revenue from the Milton First Responders Fund for the purchase of 2 motorcycles for the police department, $38,621 in insurance proceeds for a totaled vehicle, $204,630 in proceeds from the sale of older vehicles and fire apparatus, and the recognition of the $3 million transfer from the general fund, and a modification to reduce the transfer in from the ARPA fund in the amount of $105,022 that will now go to the capital grant fund, as that was where the expenses were booked. In the expenditures section, we have a request to recognize those revenue changes, as well as a request to release contingency funds in the amount of $312,201 that will be used to fund contingency and pay-go requests in fiscal year 2026. In the Green Space Bond Fund, we are updating anticipations for tax-related revenues, which will be taken into consideration when calculating the required millage rate for debt service in future years, as well as a correction to anticipated investment income and corresponding adjustments to set aside those interest earnings towards a potential arbitrage yield reduction payment in the future. In the T-SPLOS Fund, you can see the revenue request to correct the grant funding anticipated for Big Creek Greenway project in the amount of $227,546. There's also an anticipation of $59,596 in LMIG Safety Action Plan funding and $1,848,332 in IGA funding from Fulton County for utility relocation expenses, and the recognition of $481,430 from the Impact Fees Fund for road impact fee eligible projects. In the expenditure section, you will see those requests to allocate these revenues across their respective projects. The revenue adjustments in the Capital Grant Fund are related to the completion of the EPD Recycling and Waste Diversion Grant, the setup of the Hazard Mitigation Grant, and transfers in from the General Fund and ARPA Fund that were discussed earlier. $82,876 will be allocated to other equipment and fire to recognize the Hazard Mitigation Grant and local match funding associated with the purchase of a new generator. The reduction of $4,418 related to the finalized Recycling and Waste Diversion Grant, the allocation of $105,022 in ARPA funding to the MCPP Site Improvement Project for ARPA eligible spending in fiscal year 2024, and finally the release of $884 back to the general fund for unspent local match funding from the recycling grant. And our final fund this evening is the Impact Fees Fund, with an amendment request this evening to recognize interest revenues received in fiscal year 24 across eligible projects, as well as the transfer of allowable road impact fees for the Morris Road Widening Project to the T-SPLOS Fund to comply with budgeting rules associated with that fund. This completes all the amendments for fiscal year 2025, and I'll be happy to answer any questions should you have them.
No,
Okay.
very thorough as always.
Thank you.
Steve, do we have any public comment for this item?
No, Mayor Pro Tem, we do not have any public comments. And if you wish, you can close the public hearing.
Public hearing is now closed. Steve, please sound the next item.
I'd be happy to, Mayor Pro Tem. The next item is item B on the agenda, and it is the consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and the council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to adopt the fiscal 2026 budget for each fund of the city of Milton, Georgia, appropriating the several items of revenue appropriations, prohibiting expenditures to exceed appropriations, and prohibiting expenditures to exceed actual funding available. The first presentation and first public hearing was this evening, September 8th. At the special called meeting, we'll have a second public hearing and a vote at the next meeting, which is September 15th, 2025. Bernadette Harville.
Good evening again. We are here this evening to discuss the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026 which will cover revenue collections and spending from October 1, 2025 to September 30, 2026. Staff has presented 2 budget input and feedback sessions this year and has presented the proposed budget in its entirety at the work session on August 11th, which included a detailed look at continuing operations as well as new initiatives. Tonight is the first of 2 public hearings that we will hold on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026 to allow for a final council input and public comment. The vote to adopt the budget for the fiscal year will be held on September 15th, following the second scheduled public hearing. Once the budget is approved, staff will complete work on the official budget book. Milton has received the Distinguished Budget Award from GFOA every year since fiscal year 2019, when it initially applied. And in the past 2 years, our team has also won special recognition, meaning we've earned the top score from all 3 reviewers on our strategic goals and strategies and performance measures. We continue making strides towards communicating our intentions as well as our outcomes to our community, and this has been a very meaningful recognition for our team. Tonight, we will present on a high-level overview, and we'll be happy to address any questions you may have in more detail, so please stop me at any time throughout the presentation if you'd like additional information. I apologize for the scrolling. My number key is not working, so bear with me. Before you, we have the consolidated budget summary, which includes all budgeted funds as well as those carrying a fund balance. We have the general fund, which accounts for all operating activity that is not required to be separated out into a special revenue fund. We have 5 special revenue funds, which are required to account for specific revenue sources and the corresponding spending activity, and 6 capital projects funds, which account for capital-related projects and purchases. The citywide budget, including budgeted spending across all funds, is approximately $64 million. Please keep in mind that all capital projects funds are budgeted on a project length basis, and any unspent funds will carry over into the next fiscal year as part of the city's capital improvement plan. Just a reminder that all budget requests must tie back to the city planning process and our strategic goals as outlined in each year's budget book. Each plan that guides spending requests have received public input and have been adopted by council. We have plans including the 5-year strategic plan, the comprehensive plan and its short-term work program, other community development planning documents, transportation plans, the local road safety plan, pavement and stormwater plans, the T-SPLOST project lists, the trail prioritization plan, other parks and recreation master plans, and department-specific strategic plans that we follow. Here we have the general fund budget summary. You can see this actual earnings and spending activity for fiscal year 2023 and 2024, as well as the updated amended budget for fiscal year 2025. Those fiscal year 2025 figures include all of the amendments proposed earlier this evening in the first public hearing. Since we've already gone over that fiscal year 2025 amendment in detail, this evening we will focus on the FY26 proposed budget. Please note there have not been any material changes to the request for these items as opposed to those that were presented on the August 11th work session. The overall revenue forecast equals $49,782,134, with ongoing revenues increasing by $1.58 million, or 3.3% from 2025's amended budget, and total overall revenues increasing by $1.47 million, or 3% when taking other financing sources into consideration. Continuing operations, excluding the required 1% contingency and new initiatives, have increased by 1.9% compared to fiscal year 2025's amended budget. Included in the 1.9% increase is the requested 4.1% market adjustment to salaries based on the state and local government figures reported in the March 2025 Employment Cost Index put out by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as the impact of these market adjustments on salary-dependent benefits such as the 401A, 457B, employer-provided life and AD&D insurance and disability benefits, and workers' compensation premiums. The overall salary impact of those adjustments, including the impact of salary-dependent benefit calculations, is approximately $795,000 across all staff, of which $665,000 or 84% is attributable to salaries and wages. When taking contingency and new maintenance and operating initiatives into consideration, the year-over-year variance is $1,299,179, or 3.5%. At the bottom of the summary, you will see the final projected fund balance at $12,880,000 $832,945, which is in line with our required reserve policy of 25% of the subsequent year's revenues. Before you is a detailed revenue projection across all sources. As mentioned earlier, we went over this in detail. The current year real property tax projections are based on the adopted millage rate of 4.193 mils. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about these revenue forecasts. I'll kind of scroll through them really quickly. And again, nothing has substantially changed since that work session. Does anyone have any questions before moving on?
Not here.
Okay. We'll go down to new initiatives. We went over the detailed variances between the departments year over year at the work session as well, but I'll be happy to answer any of those questions if you have them. All right. These 3 positions will be scheduled to begin on October 1st if approved. The 2 information services positions will ultimately reduce the funding required to the managed services contract, yielding an overall cost savings in '26. And then we have the 2 new school liaison officers being requested. Happy to answer any questions about those those positions. Okay. Now we are in the special revenue funds category or section. We have the city events fund with anticipated revenues related to vendor fees and sponsorships for events, as well as the interfund transfers, which include funding from the general fund in the amount of $104,064 and funding from the hotel motel tax fund in the amount of $65,000. Again, any unspent funding in fiscal year 25 will reduce the required transfer from the general fund in fiscal year 26 and will be updated through the budget amendment process next year. There's your events or your spending by events. In the opioid settlement fund, we have forecasted revenues at $25,000 and related authorized spending in the amount of $51,077, which includes allocation of fund balance from fiscal year 25. Staff is working together to identify authorized purchases for these settlement funds based on various agreements the city has signed on to. The confiscated assets fund has a fund balance of $41,223, which will be allocated once the police department identifies suitable purchases that are authorized under the rules of this particular fund. The E911 fund includes a transfer out of all earned revenue to the city of Alpharetta as part of our current IGA. Alpharetta uses these funds to provide dispatch services and facilities. The operating grant fund has no activity planned or fund balance in fiscal year 2026, so this chart is just here showing activity from fiscal year 23 and 24. Our existing operating grant related to the ongoing facility assessment does not meet the requirements to be accounted for in this separate fund and will be recognized as part of the general fund activity for fiscal year 25 and 26. The American Rescue Plan Act Fund has no projected activity at this time based on the timeline to spend down the remaining funds associated with the hydrology and stormwater work going on at the Milton City Park and Preserve passive acres. If funds are not exhausted by 9/30/25, we will adjust the budget through a future council-approved amendment. The Hotel Motel Tax Fund accounts for revenues received from the city's one hotel off Deerfield Parkway, and we anticipate approximately $65,000 in fiscal year 26 based on the recent history, and those funds will be transferred to the City Events Fund to support expenses associated with city-sponsored events. Does anyone have any questions about any of the special revenue funds? Okay. Here we have the capital improvement plan in its entirety, and we also have the budgeted summaries by fund that show how the forecasted revenues and expenditures are allocated across each fund for fiscal year 2026. Does anyone have any questions about any particular projects? I have all the project sheets if you'd like to go over any of them. Okay. We'll take a little bit closer look at the PAYGO program, which we have right here. This includes the PAYGO funding requests across the entire 7-year capital improvement plan forecast, and we have updated the current available balances based on spending in fiscal year 2025, but no changes to the fiscal year 2026 requests have been made since the presentation in August. But that'll show you that the transfer to cover those expenses is $8,720,329. To that, we add some other funding needed for contingency, and that makes up the transfer out from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And then our final item this evening will be the new capital requests. Again, bear with me, my number keys aren't working.
My word.
The suspense. Almost there. Okay, we're there. There have been no changes to the new capital initiative since the budget workshop. The requests include the vehicles for the 2 school liaison officer positions, funding to support recommendations coming out of the Safe Streets for All study, and funding to demo structures across a few different locations within the city. Staff is happy to answer any questions you may have about these requests in more detail if you'd like. And if not, that concludes the first of our 2 advertised public hearings on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026.
Are there any questions for staff? Steve, do we have any public comments for this item?
We do not, Mayor Pro Tem, and you may close the public hearing if you wish.
Public hearing is now closed. There are no zoning agenda, unfinished business, or new business items. Moving on to mayor and council reports. Anybody have any comments they want to make? I just want to make one, and that was the Touch-A-Truck. If you haven't been, it's really kind of fun. I took my son there, and we just walked around, and the amount of people that had a great time. Those kids just love it. I think it's just a great thing that we do. So, job well done by staff.
Thank
What
you.
a
I'll
great
pass
job.
that along to everybody.
It was very well run.
Was it at Stone Creek again?
It was.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, the combination between Stone Creek and Milton worked out great.
Good partnership. And Kings Ridge, for that matter, using their buses to get people around.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even realize that.
hmm
That's great.
All their school buses are used to, 'cause, I mean, there's not enough parking to do an event that size really anywhere. So there's people parking at Cambridge, at Kings Ridge, kind of all over the place.
The traffic when I left was backed all the way up. It was pretty far. All right, that concludes the specially called city council meeting. Do I have a motion and a second, please, to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Kramer and a second from Councilmember Henny to adjourn. All those in favor, please vote.
Amen.
Good job, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, if I can get mine. Thank you.
Good job.
We're
Rick.
Thank you
done.
all.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
Thank you.